So, but he's
Yep. Sorry, I didn't have the chat up. I didn't.
Oh, please, I'm so grateful. Yay. Maybe we
No worries.
let me give you a quick intro and then let's start talking about fisheries if you guys don't mind, because I suspect that we are going to have a number of questions for you, sir. So I feel very, very honored to have you come speak to our group. We really genuinely appreciate it. For those of you on the webinar who don't know, pretty much all the fisheries reports and information around the state gets funneled up to this guy. He's like, hail to the chief guy. So a really good one to give us a macro perspective. And the last time he spoke to our group was a couple of years ago. I believe it was on the walleye topic on Mille Lacs, when that was such an initial controversial issue. And what I recall from that information that you presented, it was wonderfully articulate and it was so freaking complicated. I mean, I really got how complicated and how many variables were involved. And I don't even like to fish. And I was riveted by the information that you presented. So I really appreciated that. And I didn't realize until I was going to do a little intro for you that you were you've been involved with a citizen-based walleye work group. You've done all kinds of, walleyes are kind of it sounds like a real passion for you. So what I was hoping that you could talk to our group about today is this legislative piece that was introduced a few weeks ago about bag limits of walleye being statewide brought down from 6 to 4. I know that was, we understand that that was a legislation created topic. But during our event a couple of weeks ago, CMR does a Day on the Hill event every year, and we had meetings with legislators over a 2-day period. And this legislation piece kept getting talked at us, and we were asked continually, what is our stance as a group? What is our opinion on this legislative piece? And all we could say is that as a group, we don't have a stand because we had people who had opinions kind of all over the place. So we would love to get a macro perspective from, you know, is it true that the walleye numbers are down statewide because of technology or record number fishing licenses or yada, yada, yada? And would this legislation maybe help that, you know, provide an impact or not? So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. We appreciate it.
Sure. Well, your introduction was very kind. Thank you. I want to let people know, I think some of you know who I am and a little bit of my background. I started with the DNR. I've been with the department and it'll be 35 years in August. Started in Waterville for a brief period, and then I spent almost 25 years out in the Glenwood, Alexandria area. And so that's really where I met my wife. She's a Starbuck native, and my kids grew up there until we moved down here to the cities when I left the research side and went into the management side. And then it'll be 3 years in July. I was lucky enough, sometimes I don't feel so lucky, frankly, having this job, but it's been fascinating. And you know, when I was a regional manager, it was a different ballgame where I could, if people were talking about, like, say, Vermilion or Lake of the Woods or something, I could just kind of listen as a science person. But now I have to know a little bit about everything. And I really rely on the staff out there. Our staff are super dedicated. They're really knowledgeable. And I'll probably say it a couple times during this, but if you have a question about fishing, always start at your local area office. They really are the experts. When I was in research in Glenwood, I spent a lot of time talking to lake associations because I was doing research, and it was primarily walleye research. I did a lot of walleye stocking. I know a couple years ago I met one of you who was on Lake Mary. That was one of my first study lakes, with Mary, Ida, and Miltona. Then I did some statewide walleye stocking information. So that's a little bit of my background, and I also did quite a bit of work on bluegills and crappies, primarily angler, what we call exploitation, which is basically the percentage of the population that anglers take out every year. We learned some really interesting things about, historically, the state of Minnesota didn't do, when the winter walleye season ended, our creel surveys or angler surveys stopped. But we did them year round on bluegills and crappies, and it was fascinating. On Lake Lahamadou, one March and April, over a third of the bluegills that were harvested out of that lake came out in those 2 months. And so we were missing a lot of that in the past. So, and I'm going to get back to creel surveys as we talk about this walleye issue as well. So Kim, to answer your question, your first kind of question, no, I would not say that the walleye population around the state is in decline. I wouldn't go there. The other thing that we need to remember is that probably I need to get this number updated, but probably 3/4 to 80% of the walleyes that are caught in Minnesota are naturally reproduced, because and so our stocking program, while very important for the 75% of walleye lakes that wouldn't have walleye if we didn't put them in, but they're primarily smaller lakes. So we maintain a stocking program as well, but I think a lot of people tend to think that most of the walleye are there by the grace of the DNR, and they're not. They're by the grace of Mother Nature, and that's why we do an awful lot of monitoring, because we have to know what's going on. And when we run into problems on a lake, you mentioned Mille Lacs, it's usually because of recruitment. And recruitment is there's two things to remember. There's reproduction, that's the walleyes getting together and doing their thing in the spring. And then there's recruitment, which is the survival of those fish from the egg to the fry through their first summer up to, an 6-7 inch fingerling in the fall. And then they have to get through their first winter. And so when we have issues, it's usually either a reproduction issue or a recruitment issue. Mille Lacs was never a reproduction issue. We are able, and we've done this on many other lakes, if we stock fry, we can soak them in oxytetracycline, which puts a little mark on their ear bone. So, when you're talking a fish that's yay big, that's the only way to mark them is by immersion. And then we look at the ratio of marked to unmarked fish when we do samples later in the year. We can tell how many are out there. So that was never the issue. Now, on some other lakes, that has been the issue. Back in the day when the red lake fishery was in very, very bad shape, we weren't getting enough even reproduction because the walleye population was so low. So we were able to jumpstart that by stocking fry, and then it came back, and now red is just flourishing again. It's a tremendous fishery right now. It set a record on winter pressure this year. So, no, I would not say that our walleye populations around the state are in decline. What we are seeing, though, and you alluded to this, Kim, as well, is higher fishing pressure and also more effective fishing pressure. The electronics that are out there these days are just unbelievable. As someone who doesn't even own a flasher, when I go ice fishing, I don't even use a flasher, but I'm going to change because I keep getting outfished by people who have them. But it's amazing. And last year, and I've gotten this question many times, are we going to do something because of all the fishing pressure from last year? I was actually just on a meeting with Representative Eklund from International Falls a couple of days ago. And he talked about, and I heard this from Kevin Peterson up there as our area soup as well, that pressure on Rainy this year was probably a record. We didn't have a angler survey this year on Rainy. Like I said, Red Lake set a record this winter in pressure. Last year, Mille Lacs set a record at over 3 million hours, and Lake of the Woods hit 3 million hours as well. And it's not just our big lakes. I would imagine that many of you saw that on your businesses this year. And one of the really interesting things, when the pandemic hit, fishing license sales skyrocketed, and that was because there was something safe and fun that people could do. We did expect, however, to sell fewer non-resident licenses because we didn't think, given the way things were going, people weren't going to travel. Well, that turned out not to be the case either. I mean, both our resident, non-resident sales by the end of the year were over 10% higher. So we sold at least 100,000 more licenses last year than we had the previous year, and the highest in 20 years. It's one of the things to remember is that in general, Minnesota, we're doing a lot better than most other states, but there is a general decline in hunting and fishing license sales over time. Minnesota, we're bucking that trend really pretty good in fishing, but it's still there. The other thing for us to remember is that with population increasing, if we're selling the same number of licenses, it's it's about relevancy. You know, how relevant is the work we do to the broader public? And that's one of the things that we're trying hard to explain to people, is that by managing fish and their habitats and the water, we're providing a service for all people as well. Clean water is good for fish, and clean water is good for people. So to get to the 4 fish limit, this is something that has been really talked about for really it came up about 6-7 years ago in our citizen walleye work group. And that's a group of folks who from all around the state. Some are guides, some are just avid anglers, some run tournaments, etc. But just a real good group of people, real knowledgeable folks. And this started coming up from them because of what we were seeing in terms of not only more fishing pressure, but the effectiveness of people. You know, you think back if you have a GPS now, you can get to what I used to call in my bass fishing days, the spot on the spot. You know, you didn't have to line up with the water tower in the high school. You know, it was, you can go right there. These new electronics are amazing. And can we prove that reducing the walleye limit from 6 to 4 will benefit Lake X? No, we can't. But there's a lot of logic that we're working off of here, and why we supported Senator Rood's bill. Senator Rood from Brainerd introduced it, and it was not a DNR bill. She did introduce it, but we decided to support it. And it's very hard for us to really bring a ton of science to this. We can bring some. And part of the problem is that as we've gone through budget reductions over time, one of the things that really got eliminated was krill surveys on smaller lakes, medium-sized lakes. You know, well, I mentioned Marietta and Miltona, those kind of lakes, or even we got krills now going on, like on Washington Lake down near Mankato, for instance. Those locally important fisheries, but not our large lakes. We have to do our large lakes. Sometimes for well, we have agreements with Ontario on Lake of the Woods and Rainy to make sure we don't overfish those. We have agreements with, we have court order things with Red Lake and with Mille Lacs Band. There's also some tribal interest on Vermilion is another one. So we have to do krill surveys on those lakes. But fortunately, and this really only started about 3 years ago, we were able to get, it's called a change item through, where we can do more of these krill surveys. That's what we need to rely on to say, because I think most of you know that very few people actually go out there and catch a limit of walleyes on a given day, unless you're on a really good lake. We did, there's Ottertail Lake was a good example. There were some krills done in the 90s, and it was up, some years it was up to 15% of the people that were keeping more than 4 fish per day. So that's probably enough to make a difference on that particular lake. Can I say that is the case on Bald Eagle Lake here in the Twin Cities? No, I cannot, because I don't have a krill survey. So there's other social aspects to this as well. Virtually all of our large lakes, with the exception of Winnie and Cass, and it was Pepin until this year, by the way, we just changed our border water regulations with Wisconsin, and that now has a 4 fish limit as well. Already have a 4 fish limit. And people, we have not seen anything to suggest that the tourism is changing on any of those lakes. As a matter of fact, like we said with Rainy this year, it was the highest we've ever seen it. And a lot of the winter stuff, Red, because fishing can be so good, sometimes has a 3 fish bag limit, and people still flock there. So, but the reality is that we don't know what fishing pressure is going to continue to do. We do know that electronics are getting better. We do know that social media puts people on a hot bite more often. You know, the fish start biting on some lake, and you know, you can have 20 people there, you know, within an hour if you reach out to them on social media. So these things do happen, and there are situations. We do think we will preserve some fish this way for the future. We do also acknowledge, though, that it's going to be very hard for us to measure. The other thing is that this will help with some consistency. You know, you got you've got Lake Mille Lacs. That's a bad example. You've got Vermilion Lake that has a 4-fish limit, and right across the road you can have another small lake that has a 6-fish limit. So there's some simplicity and some things we've heard that from people. The other thing that I've been hearing from a lot of guides is that people, their customers generally, what they want to do is catch a lot of fish and then have enough for a meal. And that's really about it. You know, the days of loading up your freezer and then forgetting, and then 2 months later having a bunch of freezer burned fillets, those seem to be going away. People are more likely to just keep what they're going to eat fresh. And I think that's a good thing. Plus, we've added other harvest opportunities, for example, with northern pike, that you can keep a lot of small pike as long as you are in the north central zone, for instance. So there's other opportunities for people to keep fish. And finally, the other states around us, and Ontario for that matter, all have limits lower, daily limits lower than ours. Now, granted, they have possession limits that are a little higher, but you know, we're not seeing it. We're not seeing this mass exodus of people going to these other states or provinces because they can keep more fish. You know, like I said, our license sales are doing well. People, so I'm kind of talking myself into a circle here. I'm gonna try and wrap this up, and then I want to open it up for questions, both on that and on other issues that you would like. So we do support the bill. We acknowledge that there's a large social aspect to this, that it's not just a biological problem that we're trying to solve. We're trying to be proactive in the face of, well, when I say we, I mean, it's because we're supporting this bill. I can say that. It's not, but again, I'm hearing from guides that their customers, and they ask them, their customers are fine with it. Several members of our walleye work group, they do seminars or hold tournaments around the state. What they're telling me is that 85 to 90% of the people they talk to, once they hear about it, they're supportive of it. They don't see a reason for a higher bag limit for the 6 fish as opposed to 4. So yeah, and we're getting some pushback. If you read the Outdoor News, a former employee of ours has written against it. I think his primary reason. Oh, okay. I was reading the chat. And frankly, I've got current employees who don't think we have the science to do this, and we should rely only on the science. But the reality is, fisheries management it involves fish, it involves their habitat, and it involves people, and we have to take that into account. We don't know what the future is going to be in fishing, but I can only imagine it's going to get easier to catch fish. Now, people they'll tell me, well, you still got to make them bite. But if you take one of the challenges of fishing out of the way, getting the fish to bite, we do believe that anglers are more effective than they used to be. And we think this is a proactive move. So that's why we supported that. There's several groups around the state. There's a Walleye Alliance in Brainerd. Nate Blazing, who's the head of theirs, he testified at the hearing that I was on this bill as well. So again, I think I'll stop there, and if you know, you could use the hand raise function, or people can just unmute or type something in the chat, or whatever you'd like to do.
Can you also address, Brad? So I spoke to my area fisheries manager in Park Rapids the other day because we were having a lot of questions come up about the walleye stocking last year due to COVID.
Yeah. Yep.
Stopped, and I know that they're back up and running, I think, and I understand from him that the top DNR are just allowing area fisheries guide to make their own decisions about how to go back into the stocking. So I know that there were some concerns by some of us who, my lake, for instance, gets stocked every other year on the odd numbered years. Mm-hmm. So it did not really affect me because this coming into 2021, I'm assuming that our lake will probably get stocked like normal. Some of my colleagues were supposed to be scheduled last year and didn't get the stocking. And so they were wanting to know when they would get stocked, if they would be, if everybody would get stocked this year, or if they would just have to wait until their normal year. And if you have anything to share.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a little bit of both, really. And the other thing, we were able to stock some fish last year. We were able to buy some fish from the private sector, and then we went into our ponds and we ended up getting about 40,000 pounds out of our ponds, which was really quite good. But they're carryover fish, which are bigger, so you end up stocking fewer of them because we stock by the pound. But again, that survival rate on those fish is so much better. So a lot of lakes that are fry stocked we're gonna do some makeup, not everywhere. There's some places where it makes sense to try and go back and fill in. For example, if you would end up with, like, as you said, an every other year stocking, if you miss that one, you could have a 3-4 year gap in fish, and we don't want to see that. The other thing, it was really kind of cool. The other thing we were able to do this year, because we didn't stock fry in a lot of lakes, is we were able to check on natural reproduction in a lot of our lakes that we really hadn't been able to do for a while. And it was pretty good in a lot of places. Again, I spent so much time in the Glenwood Alex area that I know, like, for example, Lake Reno did very well. I think Mary as well. So we did that. So the bottom line is, we're going to try and take more eggs this year and hatch more fry and do some of that makeup stocking. However, if any of you have ever been to one of our spawning stations, it's almost like a complicated choreographed dance. They're moving things around. And in order to be safe with COVID, we've had to put in some different protocols. So we're not certain that we're going to be as efficient. We may have to stay in a run longer than we normally do to get the same number of eggs. The other thing is, with this kind of early spring, sometimes that, and particularly low water, can do a number on our river runs where the fish run up. So we're hopeful. It's very, like I said, most walleyes in the state are naturally reproduced, but we really want to provide angling opportunities elsewhere if it's going to work, and that's what we do with stocking. We've cut back on stocking in some lakes. There was a group of about 250 lakes that about 10 years ago, we basically doubled the fingerling stocking rate. And after 10 years, we went back in to see, and about a third of the lakes, we decided to stay with the higher stocking level. About half the lakes, we went back to the normal stocking level, and the remainder, a lot of times we switched them over to fry stocking. So we're continually evaluating that. On our large lakes, where we get information every year, that's really easy to do. We can be very adaptive in our management. We have a great deal of information. Most of our lakes, though, we only get to them every 3, 5, and some even 10 years. When you get into an area like Otter Tail County or Grand Rapids, Itasca County, you get a lot of lakes. So, excuse me. Hang on, I got to mute quick.
Yeah. Well, everybody, please, if you've got some questions, Brad is here to answer all kinds of fisheries questions, not necessarily just walleye, although we'd be happy to stick with this topic. Please go ahead and unmute yourself. Just simply state what resort you're from and ask away, please.
There's a question in the Q&A from Sue and Scott at Pike Point Resort, and they ask, will the possession limit be higher if you drop the daily limit?
That is not currently in the bill. No. In the bill as it stands right now. And in some ways, I think that gets back to what I talked about earlier, and what I'm hearing from guides is that, people aren't as interested in I got to have 6 fish in my freezer, or I got to have twice the daily limit as a possession limit. I don't hear that. Minnesota is always, with the exception of yellow perch, and that's kind of a weird one. that with the exception of yellow perch, we always have the same daily and bag limit. Now, on some of our new sunfish regulations, like if we have 5 or 10, what we did decide to do on that one, on those individual waters that we're managing that way, is the possession limit will be the statewide possession limit, which is currently 20. So if you go to, I know Pymouche Lake, for instance, Ed Fusi, he's on, I've known Ed for quite a while. They have a 5 fish bag limit. That one's been on for quite a while, but we're planning to switch all of our sunfish possession limits. So you could go to the lake one day and keep 5, and then you could go back the next day and catch 5, or you could go to another lake that has a 5 fish bag and fish that lake. It's meant, and our enforcement folks support this because really it's really hard for them to, once a person's off the lake, to enforce bag limits and possession limits. So they're supportive of that.
Gosh, anyone else have questions? We definitely have more time for them. So this is not my area of expertise, so please.
This is not mine either, but I'm kind of curious about the stocking facilities that you have. Are they typically off lakes or off rivers, or are they attached to the rivers or attached, roughly how many facilities for walleye stocking do we have in the state? And do we have only facilities stocking walleye that are only in the state? We don't have any outside state stocking, correct? Okay. No,
we don't. There's about, we don't operate all of them every year, but there's about 12 hatcheries around the state. Our 2 biggest are in Waterville and in New London, but we also hatch eggs, for example, at Brainerd and at Bemidji and Park Rapids and just all kinds of. And one of the reasons we do that is the genetics are very important to us. There's a walleye is not a walleye is not a walleye. For example, we can find genetic differences between fish within the different watersheds. For example, the Red River watershed, the Lake Superior watershed, the Upper Miss, the Lower Miss, et cetera. So there are genetic differences. And even individual lakes sometimes have their own genetic strain. For example, Mille Lacs has a very unique genetic strain of walleye in it, which when we did some experimental fry stocking a few years ago, we needed to get the fish right out of Mille Lacs. We couldn't take them from somewhere else. There's a really cool story going on in southern Minnesota right now. There's a handful of lakes down there, and Lake Sarah is the most famous down there in the Windham area, where we always stocked walleyes in there. I mean, we just stocked them. And then we started looking, and all the fish had a certain genetic strain, what we call the Lower Mississippi River strain. And that dates back to, there was only a few years where we did a walleye run out of the Waterville area on the Cannon River system. Those fish have persisted. They're spawning. They're naturally spawning. And this is in southern Minnesota, and where a lot of times, a lot of our lakes don't have good natural reproduction. But the genetics of these fish is very clear, and there's something different about it. We also have what we call our Crow Wing River strain, which is kind of that Spicer, Candy-Ojai County area, So that's really fascinating stuff. And so we don't want to mingle the fish together. So we know what genetic strain they are, and they can go to the right place. So and it also spreads the workaround. I mean, we probably are I think we are the largest rearer of walleye in the country. It's a big workload.
Yeah, that's a big one. Wow, I didn't know that there were 12. That's fascinating to know. So there's a couple questions here in the chat. Lynn from Black Pine Beach wants to know, are possession limits the same for in-state and out-of-state guests?
Yes, they are.
And then the Bloomquists at Cedar Point Resort, they were interested in the science behind crappie limits.
Mm-hmm. Sure. We have, a few years ago, we did change the statewide bag limit on crappies from 15 down to 10. There's also quite a few lakes that have special regulations on them. Generally, that's a reduced possession limit, like a 5. There are some lakes that also have a 10-inch minimum on crappies. And what we do with crappies are a little tricky. And I did, actually I spent about 4 years researching this when I was out in Glenwood. They're kind of a boom and bust type fish, is that you tend to get these really good year classes and then not so good for a few years. And so you kind of ride that, you know, and you can watch them as they grow up. If you're out fishing a lake and you're catching, you know, 8, 9-inch fish, and, you know, a few years later, suddenly you're catching 12-inch fish. So crappies are a tricky one. They're just, and the other thing with crappies now is they're really very susceptible to the new technologies that are out there, like the side scan. You know, people who are diehard crappie anglers used to go out and drill about 40 holes and then bop 1 to 1 to 1. Now they drill one and they zip the side scan around and oh yeah, the school's over that way. Let's go get them. So, you know, is 10 too high for a statewide limit? Probably not, but crappie, I can tell another little anecdote. Sorry, I keep telling these stories, but on Freeborn Lake in the Alex area was a lake that I was doing some crappie research on. We went out one fall and to make sure that fish, and our trap nets were just full of these beautiful 12, 13-inch fish. We thought, wow, this is great. And we were going to start tagging in next spring. Well, we went back the next spring and netted for a week. And I think we caught 12 crappies total. Well, I talked to a couple of people in the office who happen to live in that near Home City, which is where Freeborn is. It got pounded that winter. I mean, apparently there were dozens of fish houses out there. People were going out there. They just got pounded. And so that's, you know, was part of that illegal fishing? Perhaps there may have been some of that, where people double tripping. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But generally the 10 fish limit, or when we do special ones on lakes that we have they have good histories of crappies. We have gone to 5 possession.
Say, Brad, this is Clint Mueller. We live on Lake Plantagenet, just southwest of Bemidji. And I don't know if you touched that or not. I was kind of doing some other stuff trying to listen, but is the average size of the walleye pretty much across the state declining? I know I used to work with Gary Bernard all the time prior to him retiring. And what they noticed the last couple of times they did netting out here is that our average size of our walleye continues to drop in size. So, you know, we used to have like a 1 3/4 pound walleye was average size. Now I think we're down to like 1 1/4 pounds, roughly, something like that for our average size of fish. Do you see that statewide, or is that kind of just lake by lake type things?
Yeah, that's generally very much lake by lake, and that's kind of also driven, that can be due to strong year classes as well. I'll use Winnie as an example. Winnie went a couple years without some good year classes, so people were having the same issue. They weren't seeing the bigger fish. Well, now there's 3 really good year classes coming up. It was funny. I was on a video call with the head of our enforcement division, and he was in his fish house on Winnie, and he kept catching these little tiny walleyes and sending them back. So no, I would not say we're seeing that on a statewide basis. It changes. If that persists, that kind of thing does suggest that there may be some overharvest going on if it persists. Generally, if you see it for a couple of years and then things kind of go back, that's more year class strength driven. But if you just never get back to the bigger fish, that's a sign that maybe we should do something there.
Well, since we started doing AIS inspections down at the public access, and they're keeping records, what we found out now is that Lake Plantagenet is the busiest lake in Hubbard County. We have the most boat access in the county, in Hubbard County. So we're I was surprised by that, I guess, myself. But I can see there's just so much fishing pressure out there. And of course, our guests, when they come up, they want to keep the biggest fish they can to take home, you know, because they're paying the fees and making the trip. So I can understand that too, I guess. But all right, thank you.
Yeah, again, that's interesting. Like I said, I would need to rely on probably Andy Thompson out of Bemidji on that one. But if it persists, that's where I would be concerned.
So, do you think, of course, talking about walleyes again, they did a tagging survey out here quite a few years ago, and we found fish up on Stump Lake in Bemidji, which is 14 miles away. Is that pretty logical that these fish will travel 14 miles just back and forth in the river and lake systems?
Yeah. They did a really interesting study on the Cass Lake system as well, with March Fry and the way they distribute it throughout the basin. So yeah, fish will definitely move you know, sometimes it's related to a spawning run. For example, that's how we take advantage, how we take our eggs, is walleyes are running up a river to go to their spawning areas. And sometimes it's just, it's weird. I mean, I did a lot of fish tagging myself back in the day. And for example, on Maple Lake in the Alexandria area, I tagged a bunch of crappies and bluegills there. We'd occasionally get some of them reported back out of Reno, and that's not much of a connection there. So fish do move. You know, our fish in the Mississippi River are notorious for that. You know, you hear about the people stacking up under the, you know, Lock and Dam 3 near Red Wing for the spring runs.
So another thing I noticed too that was really interesting is that when they had tagged these fish, we did kind of creel surveys here at the resort and at the public access, and asked all the people on the lake to do kind of a creel survey so we could see once what the numbers were. But that was, I want to say in 2004 or 5 maybe is when they did that tagging. And I haven't had none come in lately, but we do get a few fish get caught yet with those tags in them. And it's amazing to see how much they've grown over a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's just amazing to see that the females bulk right up and they actually turn into pretty nice fish. And the males, yeah, if you get 17-inch male, that's actually a pretty big fish for a male. So it's kind of interesting when you see that.
Yeah, that's common in a lot of fisheries, that the females will be, in many species, you know, the females, they grow bigger and than the males do. The males put their energy into reproduction. The females also mature at an older age. And for walleye in general, you're looking at males maturing at 3 or 4. And for females, you're looking more like 4, 5, or 6. So it's amazing how long some fish can live too.
Okay.
Well, I've aged walleyes as old as 21. But that's pretty rare. Most of the time, once you get past, say, about 12, they really start having a lot more natural mortality.
I know they were doing gillnet surveys on us every 3 years, and now I think they're at 5 is what they moved to. And the last time we did a gillnet survey, of course, I used to go out in the boats with them and help them when they used to do everything in the boats and reset the same nets. Now they put them in coolers and haul them back. But the last time they did a gillnet survey, our numbers were down and we were kind of nervous. But when I talked to Gary at that time, when we went out and watched them pull nets, and when they were pulling up the nets, they were so full of crayfish.
Oh.
They were just falling off the nets. It was terrible. And then he said when they got back to the shop to do them, he said there was crayfish crawling all over the place. So when our numbers came back low, I said, what do you think caused that? And he said, well, a lot of times what happens is, or the way it was explained to me, is that when they do these net surveys, if there's enough food in an area, the fish don't tend to move looking for food like they usually do. So he said that could affect your numbers. And then he said also the water level was low. So we thought maybe that might affect it. But what kind of things like that affect the different numbers that you might see in your gillnet surveys?
Yeah, I mean, for a fish to get on a gillnet, it's got to move. It's got to move around. And fish, that's why we set them overnight, because walleyes are most active in the evening, at night, and in the morning. So unless we're doing a short-term thing, like if we want to make sure that they're still alive, you know, it can be water temperature, it can be weather patterns. It's kind of like fishing. There's days when the fish bite and there's days when the fish just don't want to bite for whatever reason. If, you know, you get a cold front or something along those lines. So that affects our netting. And that's why we would love to have more data. But with the number of lakes that we manage, that's really hard for us to do. And that's why we also tend not to, we don't want to overreact to one, either a really high catch or a really low catch. Obviously, a lot of times if there is something, particularly if it's really low and there's concern, we might add some other kind of survey, what we call a targeted survey. It might be with electrofishing. It might be just setting gill nets rather than trap nets, or set a subset the next year just to see how it looks. If there's concern, you don't want to wait. You don't want to underreact, but you certainly don't want to overreact either. And there are some lakes that just don't net very well. I was dealing with some constituents who were convinced that we were stocking a lake and it wasn't doing anything. Well, because the gill net catch was only like 2 walleyes or something. Well, we did spring trap netting and took them along on that, and there were walleyes everywhere in that lake. It just, certain lakes, be it the structure, or it probably has most to do with structure, just don't net very well. I saw that a lot when I was doing, there's some lakes that when we go out in the fall looking for the little walleyes, and there's some lakes that it's really easy to catch fish doing that, and you need a catch rate of 100 per hour to indicate a good year class. Most lakes, a catch rate of 30 per hour generally indicates a really good year class. So.
This is Kim again. Bloomquist have a question about crappie bag limit reductions and sunfish possible reductions. Has there been any discussion with the DNR about the possible reduction in limits for either sunfish, bluegills, or crappie in the near distant future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When we started this program where we've added quite a few new special regulations, we called it the Quality Bluegill Initiative, but we really should have, and we are calling it the Quality Sunfish Initiative, because even though it's generally the pumpkin seeds aren't the ones that are going to get really big, the bluegills are the ones that can get bigger, but all the sunfish are under the same limits. So it's right now statewide is 20, and that's a combination of pumpkin seeds, green sunfish, bluegill. We get a lot of hybridization between. So anyway, that was one of our panfish citizen work group. We mentioned the walleye one earlier. Our panfish group really did want us to lower the statewide bag limit on bluegills. We do every 5 years, we do a male survey of anglers around the state, and there just wasn't very much support for that. The other thing is there's a lot of lakes where they're just not going to produce quality bluegill, and people who are willing to clean 5-6 inch sunfish, there's nothing wrong with that. Where we run into problems generally is when people are keeping the bigger fish, especially the males. Now, bluegills are one. They're a fascinating critter. Actually, they have. Well, the males build the nests. I think anybody who fished bluegills would know that. But there's other males that don't build nests, and they have the coloration of a female, and they don't grow very big. Their cuckolder is the scientific term, but we call them sneakers. And what they do is when the larger male has attracted a female to the nest, that one will zip in there and steal some fertilizations. It's amazing. It took quite a while to learn this. So what happens is if you take out all the big, what we call the bull bluegills, fish start maturing earlier, and they put their energy in a reproduction and not into growth. And there's a lot of lakes in the state that are like that. Frankly, I think the DNR has some responsibility for that, because we used to tell people, yeah, you can't overfish sunfish. Well, on a numbers basis, you're right, you can't. But on a quality basis, you can. And that state survey I mentioned shows people strongly are fine with the number of fish they catch, sunfish, and not so much with the size of sunfish they catch. And so that's why we're doing that. Crappies, no, I would be surprised if we do anything lower than 10 for a while. It's really interesting too. Wisconsin did a study where they filleted, I think it was 20, or I think their limit was 25. They filleted 25 smaller fish and then a lower number of big, and you end up with the same amount of meat. If you keep 5 8-inch bluegills, you're gonna have as much meat, and it's gonna be a heck of a lot easier on cleaning them than if you had, 15 of the 6-inchers.
So Brad, this is Tom Arnick, Timber Trails Resort. On that sunfish issue, and I was going to bring something up like that. If I understand it right, if we keep we have, say for instance, you put a slot limit where only you couldn't catch anything above, I don't know, 12 inches or so, or keep anything above 12 inches on a sunfish. Then if you keep the bigger fish out there, then because there's competition, there'll be more bigger fish to compete with those larger sizes or whatever. Is that true? And have you looked at anything like maybe on a couple of lakes or whatever, where you just have a upper slot limit on panfish?
We've done, there's been a proposal to do that, and Wisconsin is actually doing a study similar to that as well, where you have a higher bag limit, but you can only have, say, 5 bigger than 8 inches. And we've thought about doing that. We kind of have a proposal to do it. And, bless their hearts, our enforcement people work really hard, but they're really not too excited about trying to measure a 20 fish limit and see how many of them are over 8 inches long. And I can't blame them for that. What you said with a maximum size, that would reduce some of that as well. They would only have to measure ones that they thought looked really close. But we really haven't talked about that one. That's interesting. One of our biologists in the metro area did propose a protected slot on crappies, like on a couple of lakes. I think it was like 10 to 13 inches, something like that, because this lake it was capable of producing 14, 15-inch crappies, which is a dandy fish. But that hasn't gone anywhere yet. So we're thinking about those things. As I said, Wisconsin is doing some sunfish research as well right now that we're really interested in. They're really interested in what we're doing on our lakes as well. We can learn from each other. Our lakes tend to be a little more productive than particularly northern Wisconsin lakes. So they're not directly comparable, but if there's good science being done, we'll take it into account. Just because we haven't done it doesn't mean it's not something that we might want to try here in Minnesota.
Thank you.
I think Kayla, our esteemed hostess for our spring conference here, might have a schedule that we need to adhere to. So I'm uncertain if we're going to go right segueing into a Cracker Barrel, or if we need Brad to hang around for a couple minutes, or if we're moving on to more topics. So
Cracker Barrel is next. So if there are more questions, this is perfect. I mean, everyone, feel free to turn your cameras on. This is kind of meant to be like, if you need to go take a break, if you need lunch, or just chat with each other. It's not going to be like highly moderated or anything. So this is really time to ask each other questions. Brad, if you want to stay on, if anyone has questions for you, feel free. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. We so appreciate your level of expertise. And I mean, I think we think about a lot, like we just want our guests to catch fish because we want them to have experience. And I know there's so much more behind it, because if that's the case, then there won't be any fish in, however long. And I don't know the science behind it all, but I appreciate you explaining it to us, so then we can go and give answers to our guests and things as well. So thank you.
You bet. And again, our website is a good resource, but our area offices I can't stress how willing and able they are to answer questions and help folks out. So
Awesome.
Unfortunately, we got a hiring freeze, pretty much a hiring freeze, and we got a lot of vacancies right now. It's I tell you, it's frustrating that we can't get some of these positions filled. One good thing that is going to happen this year we are going to be able to have student interns, which we didn't before. They really help us get more surveys done. And it also helps us. We have a program called Index of Biotic Integrity that we provide data to PCA for, and we get Clean Water Fund money to do that, which is really great. That's about the only money we get that isn't directly related to hunting and fishing license sales or the federal excise tax. We don't get any general fund money. That went away a long time ago. I don't see it coming back anytime soon. But we do get about $1 million out of the Clean Water Fund for our surveys that we do on lakes that are fulfilling needs for PCA, and that's great. That's been a lifesaver.
Wow, that's so interesting. We have a lot of our student workers will have an interest in doing things like that. So that's helpful to know that you have those openings potentially now too.
Yeah, we're done with the hiring process for this year, but absolutely, if you have students who are interested in the field, please, again, have them job shadow with the area staff, or when that's allowed again. Hopefully soon. Hopefully I'll get vaccinated soon. But even though I have white hair, I don't quite reach the age threshold yet.
We're close, everyone, right?
Yeah.
Oh, one of the panel, somebody just asked a fisheries question.
Yep, I see that. The consideration on a closed season for panfish. No, just to be honest about it, the answer on that one is no. It's certainly been talked about, and the problem, of course, is that number one, bluegills in particular, they might have 3 or 4 different spawning bouts during the season. So it doesn't necessarily do that. It would certainly help keep people from fishing fish off of beds. The problem is when you would need to do it, pretty much everything else is open. If you were really trying to protect spawning fish, everything else is open. And how do you, that's just one of those really, really tricky ones. It's one of the reasons we don't have year-round season, for example, on bass. Some people have asked for that, a year-round season on bass. Well, what's it going to hurt? Well, if you can say you're out there fishing bass, but you could be targeting a walleye spawning run. You could be in that area and doing some of that. So it's tricky. We did used to post some areas off limits to fishing. There's still a handful of that out there, but we never really saw that it was really having a positive effect, and it's a lot of work. And sometimes there's really, the only reason for posting it is that somebody doesn't want people fishing around their dock. There were some of those in the Alex area, but it's just tricky. And really the the opportunity to fish panfish year round is important. And as I mentioned earlier, on some lakes, a bulk of the harvest is coming out in the winter anyhow. So it's a tough one. It's certainly one we've talked about, but it's a tricky one to deal with.
Curious, personally, I know that my husband bitches and whines about how early the largemouth bass season is for our particular lake. And I'm sure that you have to put in a whole lot of variables depending on if it's a statewide open season on any kind of fish. You've got to kind of look at the top of the state and the bottom of the state and everybody in between. So
Yeah.
It's a little bit early, I think, for us on our particular, like we're on 11th Crow-Wing Lake. So we're the headwaters of the whole chain down there.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's and you just hope that people are we tend, even if you take a fish off a nest, if you put it right back in, generally it'll be okay. It'll get back to the nest before the predators come in and get the eggs, the little sunfish and the crayfish and all that other stuff. Excuse me. And also, we're not seeing very many, I don't know of one where we have a reproduction problem on bass. It tends not to be an issue. Bass fishing in the state right now is probably as good as it's ever been. And part of that is they're expanding northward as our water's warm. and our, seasons get longer, growing seasons get longer. Part of it is there's always been a lot of catch and release with bass, and bass have a bad reputation among some people about an eating fish as well. But I'll tell you, 12-inch bass, they're in the same family as the sunfishes, and they don't taste all that different. But now I'm not going to be eating a 16-inch bass anytime soon, but filleting up a 12-inch, I don't see anything wrong with that.
Mike, did you have a question at Cedar Point, or does anyone have any final questions for Brad? I definitely want to be respectful of your time too, Brad.
I appreciate that, but I'm happy to give a little extra.
Okay, perfect. Well, yeah. Well, we appreciate you, but they are a fun group. This group is definitely, I feel like, top notch.
Well, and I think I probably told this kind of halfway joke a couple times with you all, but when my buddies and I, we go, my high school buddies from Peoria, Illinois, we go on fishing trips, and we go to Canada now, but at times we were on Mantrap Lake, we've been on Rainy Lake, Cab, and you have a few beers and at night and you sit talking about, wouldn't it be great if we could all as friends buy a resort and run it? Yeah, what a great idea. And then as I started working with the resorts in the Alexandria area when I was doing walleye research, I started telling them, no, you guys have no idea how hard these people work. And I really, it was interesting catching a little bit of your conversation about having managers, campers taking some things for you, and because we all need a break sometime, and I really do appreciate how much work goes into running a resort and how important you are for our tourism business in this state. So,
well, thank you, truly. And by the way, I for one loved your anecdotes, because anecdotes always for me bring it to reality. So you can talk about a theory, but once you give an example, it just entrenches it into what it's like in the real world. So thank you. Don't ever apologize for sharing your anecdotes, please.
Okay, I won't.
So thank you.
It's like, oh, not that way. Now I know. I get where that is. Mm-hmm.
What was that? Oh, I don't know if Kayla knows she's on or not, but anybody have any last minute questions for Brad? Otherwise, we're going to up and move on. Go ahead, Kayla.
All right. Well, I mean, Brad, stay on as long as you want for this next section, or whatever. So really, we're just going to open this up. And thank you again so much. Open this up to everyone for question and answer. And everyone can answer however you want to do it. It definitely helps to have video on. If you're not comfortable, that's understandable, but I feel like it does help with the connection a little bit. So I'm going to unpin you.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
and
so you're not like the main to go, however.
I think I will sign off, but thanks again for the invitation, and I will happy to do it every year. One thing I miss in my job right now is traveling around the state and talking to people face to face and visiting the area offices and visiting businesses. I miss that. I'm okay working at home when I don't have to be in central office, but I really miss the traveling part. That's the interpersonal communications is huge. So again, thanks all. And I'm going to check out.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.